My fellow Americans, welcome to The Celluloid President, the podcast about American presidents on film. Today we're discussing The Iron Lady, a 2011 biopic about President Reagan's best friend, Margaret Thatcher. I'm Gary Holmes, and joining me today via Zoom from California is Jim Robinson. Jim, Margaret Thatcher is portrayed by Meryl Streep, the queen of accents. If you could develop a British accent to amuse people at parties, what would it be?
Well, wait a second. You're asking me to choose between Sean Connery's Scottish accent and the Fab Four's Liverpudlian accent, Bond versus Beatles. That's an impossible decision for me. How about you?
Well, I did a deep dive into British accents and discovered there are 40 to 50 more dialects in English compared to about 30 in the entire United States. So that's a lot to pick from.
Oh, yeah.
I'd love to talk like a Beatle. Their accent is technically called Scouse, but within the Beatles, the accents are not identical, I found out. Paul is from the southern part of Liverpool and went to grammar school for advanced students. So he has a more upper crust accent than Ringo does.
Yeah, I have a simple rule of thumb when it comes to British accents. Basically, the higher the class and the better the education of the Brit in question, the less I like the accent. I think the upper crust ones sound sort of too effete and too prissy for me. As for Maggie Thatcher's accent, she's a-okay to me.
Okay, well, she spoke in an accent that is called upper received pronunciation, which is called upper RP, or simply posh, old-fashioned English, which she consciously developed to sound more authoritative. As we see in the movie, she underwent elocution training and lowered her pitch to move away from her regional roots and fit into the male-dominated Conservative Party.
Whatever you say.
Yeah. So Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, and Pope John Paul II constitute the holy trinity of conservative leaders in the second half of the 20th century because they worked together to bring down communism, expand freedom, and reinvigorate Western values in the 1980s. What's your relationship to Mrs. Thatcher?
Well, there's nothing more obnoxious than a name dropper, right?
Yeah.
I'm about to become one.
All right.
I actually had the chance to meet with her in number 10 Downing.
Okay.
I was working for the governor of California. It was 1987. We were there to open a California trade office, and we secured a meeting with her. It was just three or four people in the room. And I have to tell you, she is everything advertised in among those who like her. She was charismatic, forceful, charming, humorous in equal measures. And so it was really one of the highlights of my professional and political career. Just a remarkable person in person.
Okay. So I have never met her. I've only interacted with her through the television screen and reading her stuff in the paper. So my feelings about her are more intellectual than visceral. I respect and admire her, but I just can't really warm up to her. Maybe if I'd seen her in person, I've actually heard that in person she could be very seductive with the men that she was working with. So it
Oh,
wasn't
yeah.
she wasn't just browbeating them as you see in the movie, but she was, bringing them along by cajoling them and getting them, just sort of being a little bit sexy with them or even flirting with them.
Yeah. Well, during our meeting, her topic most on her mind was to convince any American she talked to, especially friends of Ronald Reagan, that Gorbachev was the real deal. That
Yeah.
was what was going on, and that was her agenda. And to make some of her points, she was sitting side by side with the governor. Every so often, she would playfully grab his forearm and give it a little squeeze as she made her points, which was really interesting because George Deukmejian, while a great man, was not known for being the most outwardly emotional or talkative. So it was an interesting combination. I just have a lot of respect for someone with such a work ethic as she had, someone that came without any advantages and pulled herself up, even was a research chemist before she decided to become a lawyer and then studied law without going to law school and became a lawyer and then a politician and then a party leader and then a national leader and then a world leader. I mean, it's a remarkable, remarkable story.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree. I agree. As I was saying though, I mean, that is all that appeals to me intellectually, but not viscerally. You know, when I see her on TV and hearing her talk in that posh accent that you find kind of off-putting, and I hate to say this because it sounds like I'm making a gendered comment, but I guess I am. And it's nothing with her be doing a woman per se, because there are lots of conservative women that I really admire a lot. But there's just something about a stern British woman that makes me shiver a little bit because it reminds me of being scolded by a nanny.
Well, I'll say two other things about her, and one I really relate to. Maybe you will professionally. She was obsessed with the written and spoken word.
Yeah.
She worked hours and hours. She pulled all-nighters on her speeches. She really cared about them. And I feel that, you know, in terms of my own career. She was also the queen of the one-liner. She almost
Yeah.
rivaled Churchill
Yeah.
in coming up with the classic one-liners that would summarize her philosophy and her point of view. And I got to tell this one extra story because the same day that we had the meeting with her was question time in Parliament.
Yeah.
And we went there and we sat in the gallery and Neil Kinnock got up and he started taking her to task for being Ronald Reagan's poodle. And he said along the lines of, when President Reagan says jump, the right honorable prime minister says how high. And then he sat down and she got up without missing a beat. And she said, I'm proud of our relationship with the American president and the American people. And at least my speeches don't sound like they were written in Moscow. I mean, how can you not love that?
Well, she was not only a great leader, a world leader, but she was a generational leader, you know, and she really changed the world for, you know, a period. You know, since World War II, Great Britain has been in decline, and she managed to arrest and reverse that decline for more than a generation. For about 30 years after she became prime minister, Britain was respected and managed to punch above its weight. It had political respect in the world and economic dynamism at home. Unfortunately, all that is way gone now, and that country is devolved into a pathetic mess that no one takes seriously anymore. So that's sad.
Here, here.
Yeah. And of course, she did all that while she's a woman. I mean, you know, I admire that. And not only that, a middle class woman. You talked about her being a chemist. She was mocked as a grocer's daughter. You know, in America, everyone wants to be from the respectable middle class, but over there, you look down on if you don't come from Oxford, Cambridge, or a coal mine.
Yeah, and
So,
that philosophy, that background came through in a lot of the sentiments she uttered during her time there. One of
yeah,
my favorites was when she said, and this was infamous for a lot of people, there is no such thing as society. There are individual men and women and families,
right.
and no government can do things except through people. It is our duty to help ourselves and then also to look after our neighbors. You know, that's middle classism
Yeah, yeah,
right
yeah.
there.
All right. So for our listeners who haven't seen the movie or maybe don't remember it, can you describe how the thoughts that we've just articulated here are represented in the plot of the movie?
Sure. The Iron Lady, 2011. It's a biographical drama starring Meryl Streep as Margaret Thatcher. The film opens in the present day with an elderly Thatcher suffering from dementia. She lives alone in her London home, still conversing with the ghost of her late husband, Dennis, as she struggles to accept his death and sort through his belongings. Through a series of flashbacks triggered by her memories, the story traces her remarkable journey as a young woman. Margaret Roberts grows up in her father's grocery shop in Grantham, absorbing his conservative values. She earns a place at Oxford, fights her way into the male-dominated Conservative Party as a lower middle-class outsider. She rises steadily through Parliament, becoming the first female leader of the opposition, and in 1979, the UK's first woman prime minister. Her uncompromising style tackles economic crises, union strikes, the Falklands War, and IRA terrorism, transforming Britain, but also energizing the left and many moderates who see her policies as cruel and heartless. After 11 years in power, internal party betrayal and declining popularity force her resignation. And all this is pieced together through her
Right.
flashbacks. The narrative weaves her political triumphs and controversies with intimate reflections on aging, loss, family, and the personal cost of power. Politics and biography often take a back seat to these issues in The Iron Lady, leading to the question, what is this film really about?
Well, that's right. And you forgot to mention that the climax of the movie is when she gives Dennis Thatcher's suits away. Yeah, we will talk a little bit more of that in a second. I'll just say that the movie had a domestic box office here in the US of 30 million and an international gross of 85 million for a total worldwide of 115 million. This ranked it at about number 75 for the year. Which is not a big hit in the US, but with the international gross, I'm sure it made a lot of money for the Weinstein Company, which produced the movie. The biggest hit of 2011 was Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, which was about 10 times as popular with a domestic gross of 380 million and a worldwide total of 1.3 billion. The top five movies that year were all sequels, by the way, including sequels for the Transformers, Twilight, Hangover, and Pirates of the Caribbean franchises. Meryl Streep won a slew of awards for Best Actress, including the Academy Award, a Golden Globe, and a BAFTA, which is the British Oscar. Critical reaction was mixed. In fact, it was because of the bad reviews that I've never seen this movie before. They really turned me off to the movie. So
Hmm.
I wouldn't have watched it if it wasn't for this podcast. And one of the critical components of the movie was the framing device, which you described earlier, in which the movie was set in the present, where Mrs. Thatcher is suffering from dementia, and the rest of her life, including her political career, is seen in flashback. Let's get this issue out of the way before we do anything else. What did you think of this framing device?
Well, the challenge facing all biopics is how to present the subject's life without just resorting to a let's begin at the beginning
Yeah.
kind of linear approach. At first thought, I didn't like the framing device. It struck me also as a little cruel since Margaret Thatcher was actually still alive
Yeah.
when this movie came out and her family and caregivers were dealing with her frailties. And I think the price that was paid was that it ended up being superficial about the many key events and points in her life. All we got was sort of triggered fragments of flashback, which is, what a dream sequence is like. And that's what this film really was to me, one long dream sequence. But the more I thought about it, and the more I considered that maybe this movie was as much about aging and loss of a spouse and how we look back on our own lives, the more I thought about it, the more I said, okay, I can go with it. I can go with it. I wouldn't have chosen the device myself, but I think somehow it worked for me.
Well, this reminds me of the movie Reagan, which we saw, I think it was last year, which is also told in flashback, this time through the eyes of a former KGB agent who followed Reagan's rise. And as
Yeah.
you know, I didn't like that framing, and I don't like it here either for much the same reason. As part of my research about the movie, I came upon a podcast in which Meryl Streep and the director Lydia Lloyd discussed the movie. And part of their actual selling point was that 40% of the movie depicted Margaret Thatcher suffering from dementia, which they argued meant anyone could relate to it since everyone knows someone who has the affliction. But but for me, if I want to see a movie about someone with dementia, I'll watch a movie about someone who has dementia. I mean, I'll just go and see a movie that's 100% about dementia. There's no shortage of them. The thing
But
is,
it's more interesting when it's a very, very famous person that did big things.
yeah,
And considering the possibility that they might not even remember that she was prime minister, or we learned that Ronald Reagan ended up not even remembering he was president
right.
and didn't recognize Nancy. This is horrific, and it brings home in a grandiose way the kinds of challenges that we could all face or have faced in our families. So I agree with you. I like the issues and I like politics
Well,
and
yeah,
I
I mean,
like, but that's why I wouldn't have chosen the device. But I think it worked because it did make it more relatable, and it did one other thing. And I don't think it was very clever. It allowed liberal Hollywood and liberal British film industry to make a sympathetic movie about Margaret Thatcher, which they never would have been able to do if it had been a straightforward biopic.
okay. So first of all, I'll make 2 points. First, I understand about the dementia, blah 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 blah, but this is a movie about Margaret Thatcher, and I wanted to see more about her, and because they took, what, maybe an hour, maybe 45 minutes or more out of the movie that could have been devoted to the policy aspects, and a lot of what happens in the movie is very superficial. You can't really
Right.
follow it because they're just doing boop 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 boop. But I do agree with you. I mean, we usually ask the question, what are they trying to accomplish? And I think it's hard for us, and just going to jump to that section right now.
Yeah.
It's hard for those of us in America to understand how divisive a figure she was. She was as despised and adored there as Trump is here, is today in the US. And the movie was only made about 20 years after she resigned. So that's not a very long time. And like you, I believe the filmmakers, who are all women, secretly admire her for her determination and strength, but also for the way she triumphed over the patriarchy. And I don't think they want to be seen as endorsing her policies. So that instead of showing how she reinvigorated the economy, they try to humanize her by playing the dementia card and making all the men seem insufferable.
Yeah. I think before there was TDS, there was TDS,
Yeah,
Thatcher Derangement Syndrome.
yeah,
You saw outright jubilant celebrations
yeah.
upon her death that you didn't even see when Ronald Reagan died.
Oh yeah,
And it had been the left's project for decades to say she was inhuman, not a human.
yeah.
And I think this movie, and we're also getting into the what I liked about it. The number one thing I liked is it humanizes Margaret Thatcher and gives a kind of a middle finger to all those who tried to dehumanize her all those years. So I think, but you're absolutely right. The price that's paid for focusing so much on her later years and her being enfeebled is the superficial treatment of a lot of the policies and events and the transformation that she engineered. The one last defense I'd make of the dementia device, it was true. It was true.
Oh yeah.
So this is not like where you wonder about that in the Reagan biopic about that
The
former
FBI,
KGB. Yeah.
yeah, the KGB agent who was following him. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
There's
obviously
no
ridiculous.
question that this was accurate.
Okay. All right. So you liked that. And I actually agree. I like that it didn't demonize her and treated her fairly even-handedly. I found that surprising because of what you just said about how the creative class in particular just despised her, not only for the policies, but for who she was. She represented
The snobbery
the
that they
snobbery is
went for.
unbelievable over
Yeah.
there. What else did you like?
Well, I think that for those that watched this movie and didn't know much about her, they came away with a generally favorable and sympathetic um, opinion of her. And I thought it did deal with the loss of spouse issue very with sensitivity. I mean, there is no question. I mean, you and I have not fortunately had to go through this,
Yeah.
but there is no question that people talk to their late spouses. that they don't want to part with the belongings, et
Yeah.
cetera, et cetera. And I think it was realistic. And I thought it was especially realistic with the mother-daughter relationship, where it's almost a love-hate kind of feeling bubbles to the surface on the part of the daughter. It's usually the adult daughter in many families that carries most of the burden of an aging parent, makes most of the decisions. And, one small example is when Margaret Thatcher, who had hairdressers on call, had to have her hair done, and she wouldn't let her hairdresser come in. She just looks at her daughter and says, "You do my hair."
Yeah.
And then the look on the daughter's face, sort of the glaring, look, those things happen. Those things are true. I know from personal exposure of some of my friends. And
Yeah, no, you're right about that. Carol Thatcher was portrayed pretty much the same way in The Crown. That they did a whole The Crown, which is about Queen Elizabeth and her prime minister. Well, Queen Elizabeth, but they did an episode in which Margaret Thatcher was the PM, and a lot of the family dynamics were on display in that show, in that episode too, including the fact that Thatcher obviously favored her son Mark over her daughter, who's
who was kind of a ne'er-do-well. The
yeah. I mean,
son,
he'd moved
yeah.
to South Africa to get away from her, and Carol Thatcher stuck around. So, I mean, a lot of times the adult daughter doesn't get as much, appreciation as the son
Yeah,
does.
but they are the decision makers
Yeah,
in many families. And in fact, the whole marketing of the assisted living industry, just as a side note, is geared toward the adult daughters.
yeah. All right. I'll
What
also
else did
say,
you like?
well, I liked, I really liked the relationship between Margaret and Dennis Thatcher, which I think is mostly speculative. I mean, I really looked around to find out what they were really like with each other, and no one really seems to know. In the movie, he's portrayed as witty and insouciant, a fun guy to be around. Not sure if that was true in real life, but it's as good an explanation as any as to how the two of them got along with each other. She being generally firm, determined, and relentless, and him being the safe harbor where he could jolly her and be emotionally supportive. So I thought I like that.
Yeah, to show you what a fan I am, a couple of years ago I read there's a 3-volume authorized biography, but
Okay.
there were no rights of editing on the part of Thatcher.
Yeah.
A 3-volume, 2,500 page biography of Thatcher, and I read the whole thing.
Okay.
And I really got into it, even though it was rather dry, British, excuse me, upper crust writing. And I think in there, Dennis is portrayed as a little more substantial
Yeah.
than maybe comes across in the movie, where he's sort of an avuncular guy in the movie. And he was a serious man, old school.
Yeah.
For example, he didn't see why there was such a compelling need to change things in South Africa, those kind of old school Brit thoughts. But he was a very serious advisor. He was not a sort of first gentleman spouse to be made fun of kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. Well, he is the one that finally convinces her to give up and resign rather than to continue pushing on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I
I
have a
also like,
weird,
yeah.
oh, go ahead. Go
I was just
ahead.
going to say I liked the acting, which we'll talk about later. I thought the
Yeah.
acting was really outstanding.
I thought this is sort of along the same lines of the humanizing issue, but what do we often see on the part of the American and British left when a conservative Black or a conservative woman starts breaking down barriers?
Right.
Well, nothing,
Right.
nothing, no credit, nothing but the same kind of heat and criticism that they would give to any white male in those roles. And so I just do a little tip of the hat. I know Streep and the writer and the director, they're all, I think, fancy themselves as feminists. They
Yeah.
wouldn't object to that title. They didn't let partisan politics trump a feminist role model breaking down
Right.
barriers.
Right.
And so I give them some credit for that, even though I'm not that big on those group identity things anyway, but at least they didn't bury it because she was a conservative.
Right. I'm with you on that. All right. What didn't like?
Well, we talked about the superficiality.
Yeah.
That was my main dislike. And as an American, and I'm disappointed it didn't go into the Ron Margaret relationship. I mean, the Reagan Thatcher relationship was a very important feature of politics in the 1980s. So I was just disappointed that it didn't do that.
Well, I agree. I mean, given that this is a podcast about American presidents, I was disappointed there wasn't more Reagan. There was just one scene where they're shown dancing together I guess it was probably at the White House. And I think there might have been, I don't know if your memory is the same as mine, just a photo of him at one
Yeah, I
point.
saw one photo,
I mean,
and
considering how close they were with each other, but if you think about it, this movie, there's very little about international politics either. You mentioned Gorbachev. There's nothing about Gorbachev in this movie and the role that she played in affecting perestroika and getting the U.S. and Russia together and the role. I mean, she had a very important international role and none of that is really reflected except for the Falklands, which is maybe has 5 minutes in the conclusion at the end as well. This helped her popularity in the UK.
yeah, and they did, as we mentioned, they didn't discuss her first career as a chemist.
Yeah.
She was a scientist. It's really interesting that both Thatcher and Merkel
Oh yeah.
began as scientists and then became, women pioneers in their
Right.
respective politics of their countries. Just an interesting note. And I did think that I thought after a while some of the repartee between Margaret and Dennis got a little tiresome.
Yeah.
It's just a little bit overdone
Yeah.
for me.
Okay.
The old couple bickering kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm just going to add to what you were saying about the superficiality. I think they're sort of rushing through things. And in one scene, she's trying to get the endorsement of the party regulars to be a candidate for parliament. Then suddenly, she's not only a member of the parliament, but also a member of the cabinet and then she decides she wants to challenge the prime minister, Ted Heath. And the next thing you know, she's actually the prime minister without any explanation about how all these things happened. You know,
Yeah.
it was just like, I get it that she's jumping from spot to spot to spot, but how did that happen?
Yeah, I know. It's not, again, I think when I started to react to this as a dream sequence,
Yeah,
how do we dream? We dream in fragments.
right.
And therefore, what we saw in terms of her personal history and the issues and politics of the day were fragmentary.
All right. Anything else?
Oh, no,
Okay. Well, let's talk about the actors then. So
sure.
Meryl Streep, generally considered to be the best cinematic actress of all time, not necessarily the greatest movie star, but the most respected actress. For starters, she holds the record for the most Academy Award nominations of any actor with 21, 17 for Best Actress, 4 for Best Supporting Actress, spanning 5 decades. She's won 3 Oscars: Best Supporting Actress for Kramer versus Kramer, and Best Actress for Sophie's Choice and The Iron Lady. What did you think about her?
Oh, I really like her. I'm not sure about greatest of all time. I mean, what about Linda Gray?
I
Um,
said
she's,
greatest actress, not greatest movie star.
oh, okay. Um, but here's why I think she's great. It took me about 4 minutes into this film to forget
Yeah.
that I was watching Meryl Streep. And the same thing happened to me when I was watching The Post, where she played Katharine Graham. She has a remarkable ability to just subsume herself into the character she's playing, and so that you forget who the actor is. And maybe that's a good illustration of what you mean by greatest cinematic actress, but not necessarily movie star. Because with a big movie star, you remember who they are from start to finish.
Well, that's right. When you're
But
watching a great Greta Garbo movie, maybe that's an ancient illusion. Who'd be better? Katharine Hepburn,
yeah,
all those people. No one's gonna get Greta Garbo couldn't play Margaret Thatcher. I mean, she's always going to be Garbo. Let's see who else is there. I mean, Margot Robbie. I mean, she's not going to play a part like this.
yeah, I just think she manages to accomplish what the method actors make a big display about
Yeah.
doing. And without all of the, pontificating and showing off and egocentrism that method actors often, make sure everyone knows about when they're preparing for a role. She just does it.
So she's played a bunch of real life people. In addition to Thatcher, she's played Karen Silkwood, Isaac Dinesen, who wrote Out of Africa, Nora Ephron, Carrie Fisher, the New Yorker writer Susan Orlean, Anna Wintour, Catherine Graham. And Jim, you'll be interested to know that she's signed on to play the present day Joni Mitchell in an upcoming biopic.
Oh, I can see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely see that.
So here we go again. She's also played a U.S. president. I'm sure you don't know this. She played a U.S. president in the Netflix movie Don't Look Up, which also starred Leonardo DiCaprio. This is a movie that we will not be discussing on this podcast unless we're truly desperate. It's a disturbing farce about how the government would react if an asteroid were about to hit the Earth. So
Oh, that's been done before.
yeah, I know. It's just it's a little it's as I said, it's a farce and it's not a funny subject because the Earth gets
Yeah.
obliterated and everyone we know dies, except for her. But that's a spoiler alert.
When we talk about Meryl in this movie, we have to talk about the makeup, which I
Yeah,
thought was fantastic. And that won the other Oscar, right? The second Oscar for the film, I believe, was the makeup. It really gave I think the fact that they framed this movie through an old and somewhat addled Margaret Thatcher helped Meryl Streep win the Oscar,
yeah.
rather than if she just portrayed Thatcher in various stages of her adult career.
Well, she basically has to play two different Thatchers, right? She has to
Yes.
play the robust Thatcher and the Thatcher with dementia.
Yeah.
By the way, I've seen her. I thought, oh, I've seen all her movies. Seems like I'm always going to a Meryl Streep movie. And then when I actually looked at her IMDb page, I was like, oh my God, I've only seen about half of them. She's extremely prolific with
Yeah.
movies, TV, theater, voiceover work, book narration. I've seen her. She played, it was like 20 years ago in Shakespeare in the Park. She and Kevin Kline were in the play The Seagull, and she was great in that too.
No, I don't think she's overrated,
I do not think she's
contrary
overrated.
to a certain viewpoint of a certain American president. Remember that
Yes,
flap? Yeah.
yes, yeah. I remember that flap, and that. I
Oh,
mean, yeah. Okay. Jim Broadbent plays her husband, Dennis Thatcher. Not as famous in the US as Meryl Streep, but almost as prolific. He won an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor in Iris Murdoch's as Iris Murdoch's husband in the movie Iris, which is also about dementia, by the way. As I said, I doubt Dennis Thatcher in real life was this much fun, but in the movie, his joie de vie offsets his wife's stern personality as a welcome diversion, even though he mostly plays a ghost. What did you think?
I thought he was good. I mean, he's a reliable,
Yeah,
longtime character actor, and he had the advantage, unlike Meryl Streep, had the advantage of people not really knowing that much about Dennis Thatcher. Maybe Brits do, seen him on camera, but there was no fixed persona and image in my mind like there was with Thatcher. But I thought he did a good job.
I'm going to mention Olivia Colman, who plays. She's no slouch in the Academy Award department either. She plays Carol Thatcher, the daughter. I like Olivia Colman a lot, but she was unrecognizable to me. I don't know what they did to her to make her look like that, but even though I knew she was in playing this part, when she came on the screen, I still thought they had another actress playing the older Carol Thatcher. There's not much to say because it's not a very meaty part. It's a thankless role, the unloved, unappreciated daughter. Do you have any thoughts on
Well,
Olivia Colman?
I've seen in those 2,500 pages of biography I read, I've seen pictures of Carol, and they created a similar look.
Yeah,
She was kind of a, you know how people dressed in the 70s and early 80s
yeah,
and the hairstyle.
yeah.
She was dressed and styled properly for this role. And we've talked about her before. She was in Hyde Park on Hudson as Elizabeth.
Oh,
Remember?
Elizabeth.
Yeah,
Yeah, sorry,
yeah.
Olivia Colman. I thought you were talking about Carol Thatcher.
Oh
Oh
no,
no,
yeah.
yeah. No, she's an excellent actress. She just sort of fades. She's like Meryl Streep. She fades into character, and I think you're right. You know, if we were in Britain and knew who Carol Thatcher was, she's probably in the. So there's probably a million pictures of her in the paper over there all the time. We probably would have thought, oh, that's an excellent portrayal. It just was. I didn't know. I was looking for Olivia Colman, and she had been. She just was unrecognizable to me. Which
Yeah.
I guess
No,
is
I
good. I
thought
mean, because she played the part so well.
right. I thought it was she was she did it in a nuanced way, as we
Oh
discussed
yeah,
before about how an adult daughter deals with an aging parent and brain-addled parent.
yeah, yeah. Of course, Olivia Colman played the Queen Elizabeth in The Crown
Yeah.
during the middle years.
What did she win her Oscar for?
I was afraid you're going to ask me that. She won it
Oh,
for The Favorite, where she
hmm
plays Queen Anne.
hmm
And I can't remember what the other one was off the top of my head.
But I think we've established that a message to Hollywood and the British film industry: if you want to win an Oscar, play a British royal or a British leader,
Yeah.
because look, they all seem to get awarded with Oscars, including that terrible one for the King's Speech.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but that's the way to sort of work your way into an Oscar, I guess.
I guess so. We do love our royals over here. Anything to say about Alexandra Roach as the young Margaret Thatcher, or Harry Lloyd rather, as young Dennis Thatcher?
I thought they were just okay. I got the sense they went out of their way to make the young Margaret look as ugly duckling as possible.
Yeah.
And I'm not, again, and Dennis is kind of a dork, and I'm not sure those are accurate. I'll tell you, I thought the guy that played her father was better.
Yeah.
A guy, actor named Ian Glenn. I thought his little snippets where he was imparting some of his conservative small business philosophy. I thought he was good.
You know, one of the things I didn't like about the movie was that the all her cabinet members sort of all blurred together, and you really didn't know who they were. Jeffrey Howe was one of her biggest supporters. So you'd never know from watching this movie that he was the foreign secretary for a long time. And Michael Hazeltine was the defense secretary, and you wouldn't know that. And they're just all sort of, and I guess that's probably deliberate that they all, sort of blur together as one big male mass.
Yeah.
All right, let's turn to the history, the accuracy. So some of the things they seem to get the big things right. Her personality, the obstacles she faced, and her triumphs. I mean, you want to drill down on anything?
Yeah. I mean, she didn't go out by herself to buy a pint of milk, which was the opening scene of the movie, where she goes into,
Yeah.
sneaks out of the house. She wasn't within eye shot or earshot of the assassination of her mentor, Neve. I'm not sure how you pronounce that.
Yeah.
When he got blown up,
Yeah.
she was not close to that. But I think they got the big things right, although again, superficial.
Yeah, I think it's a little related to that because they do make it superficial. It makes it sound like Thatcher herself was responsible for her rise and domination of British politics, but like all good leaders, she was able to channel a previously disorganized mass desire for change. In this case, there were millions of ordinary Britons and lots of conservative politicians who thought the country was headed in the wrong direction and were primed to follow anyone who articulated her concerns. So she didn't do it all herself. She crystallized the thinking and she brought the movement together and was but there was a big movement. I mean, she didn't just, wave her wand and sort of hypnotize millions of people.
Yeah, and expanding on that, it's interesting how she got elected a year before Ronald Reagan,
Yeah,
and then the Brits voted for Brexit the year before
yeah,
Donald Trump.
yeah,
And so we can make fun of them sometimes, but they do seem to eerily foreshadow
yeah.
things that are going to happen here. I thought the one of the disappointments, in addition to not exploring the Reagan Thatcher relationship, is a big part of her downfall was not just because she lost popularity and she belittled Jeffrey Howe in front of the rest of the cabinet, but the issue of whether uh, the UK should join the euro was a huge issue.
Yeah,
And she was the number one Eurosceptic.
yeah,
And it's a fascinating issue because when the customs union was first formed, the British desperately wanted to get in and the French said no.
right.
And then flash forward a bunch of years, and now they're desperate to get the UK in. And by the way, UK, you also have to pay for the privilege of coming in, to the tune of billions and billions of pounds. And she just said, hell no. And my favorite quote of her on this subject was, we have not successfully rolled back the frontiers of the state in Britain only to see them reimposed at the European level. And Howe and most of her cabinet, this was an issue for them to die on.
Yeah.
And it was an issue for her to die on. And ultimately, this probably had more to do with the disaffection and the abandonment of her by her cabinet than any other single issue.
Well, this is
And that
something
was,
else that she was right about. And,
yeah,
they played that down in the movie. I mean, I say that she was right about because 20 years later, I don't know, I haven't done the math yet, but yeah, about 20 years later, they had Brexit and they pulled themselves out. And it was an incredibly divisive issue at the time. And they're still suffering from that
yeah,
decision to get in and then get out. In the movie, they play down the EU. They do mention the EU, but they put a lot of it on the poll tax, which
right.
is a hard thing for us to wrap our arm heads around because we don't have anything like that over here. Um,
Yeah,
it's
it
basically a
was,
flat tax that everyone has to pay for local services,
right.
so that everyone has a stake in the spending budget. So
Yeah, there's a conservative thrust to that kind of
yeah,
policy. And a lot of conservatives are very concerned over here that we're excluding more and more percentages of the population
right,
from owing any income tax at
right,
all.
right.
So guess what they vote for when they have the chance, especially out here in California, to raise the income tax because they know they won't be paying it. But yeah, that was a serious issue for her. She was stubborn about it,
Yeah.
and it did end up relenting, but that cost her a lot. Um, Another historical complaint I have, it's not a mistake, it's just an omission. You would get the sense from this movie that she went from number 10 to being alone in her kitchen with dementia,
Right.
when in fact she had a very, very active and successful post premier career. She made tons of highly paid speeches. She advised companies and countries. She wrote books. She went on tours around the world, et cetera, et cetera. So there was there was another chapter for in her life that's not even touched upon here.
Yeah, and she was made a baroness, which is not
Yeah.
something that is a very rare honor for a former prime minister, which is a high, it's a higher level than just being made, I don't know, whatever they get made, earls or something. Um,
One bizarre thing about her post premiership career, and it was later on when she was suffering, um, she taped her Ronald Reagan eulogy
uh,
in advance, and it was played at the funeral while she was sitting in the audience.
okay,
Now, this is a prima facie
yeah,
acknowledgement on her part and the people around her about her capacities,
yeah.
but also a lot of foresight. A lot of, who would even admit that they had to tape something in advance because they would never be able to deliver the
Well, she's a
speech.
very no nonsense person, so I'm not
Right.
surprised that she did that. I'm going to say that for the sake of irony, that although the movie shows that she was constantly surrounded by men, which is supposed to be, an implicit rebuke of the conservative party system, the movie also doesn't point out that during the 11 years she was prime minister, she only added one woman to her cabinet. So if tearing down the patriarchy was important to her, she didn't do a very good job when she was at the zenith of her power.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point.
And I'll just say the movie doesn't really acknowledge, and maybe it doesn't need to acknowledge, but the fact is 11 years is a long time to be prime minister. It's the fifth longest in English history. And, people just get tired of you. Almost every New York City mayor who goes for more than two terms, goes for those 12 years, ends up scandal ridden and in disgrace and all that kind of thing. It's just, term limits is not a bad idea. And I think people were just kind of tired and they wanted a new face.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you're right. I mean, that's an excellent point. 11 years.
So let's talk about our favorite scenes. What's your favorite? You have any favorite scenes?
Yeah, there's several of them. When she was this is an obvious but still fun scene. But
Yeah,
when she was a new candidate
yeah,
and she had that dinner party with the upper crust,
right.
and they were all looking down upon her.
Yeah,
And then when it came time for the wives to leave, so the men could have their brandy and cigars and talk about serious issues, she was asked to leave along with the rest of the women. Again, obvious, but it was entertaining. I enjoyed it.
yeah. I was going to say I loved all those scenes where she was kind of looked down upon by the wishy-washy conservatives like Ted Heath, but then she ends up always putting them all down. Like when they say she's a grocer's daughter, and she reminds them that she has a degree from Oxford. Or later when they say there's a perception the government is out of touch with the country, and she rattles off the price of butter and other commodities. In the U.S., we call guys like Heath squishes. Over there in the UK, they were called wets. And
Yeah.
of course, now in the US, we call them cucks, which is charming. Thank you. So I'm not sure we're improving anything. I thought the
And
scene. Oh, go ahead.
no, no, you're sure.
I was going to say that I thought the scene in the hotel where the IRA tried to kill the Thatcher government, and you can see Margaret and Dennis Thatcher reaching for each other is both terrifying and tender. I mean, it's one of the scenes that I most vividly remember.
Yeah, yeah, that was harrowing, and it was every bit as close to their assassination
I
as it
know.
could be. I mean, and other members of the leadership team were killed in that,
Yeah.
and wives. Um, Another dinner party scene that I thought was really interesting and realistic was it was in her as an old woman in her in
Oh,
her
yeah.
townhouse, and she was obviously out to lunch, but they got her dressed and they tried to brief her on who was going to be there, and she sat at the head of the table and she was sort of wasn't paying attention to the conversation. And then they asked her what she thought, and it was obvious she didn't know what they were talking about. And then someone prompted her, maybe it was her daughter, I don't remember, and a switch flipped on.
Yeah.
And she instantly became the most eloquent person in the room and
Right.
recaptured for a moment that glory. And that happens. That happens to people with dementia.
Yeah. Yeah. I like the scene where U.S. Secretary of State Al Haig
Yeah, me too.
tries to dissuade her from liberating the Falklands, and she asks what America did when Pearl Harbor was attacked. Did they beg Tojo for peaceful terms? Certainly not. Um, I think Al Haig is the only American portrayed in the movie, which seems odd considering that the size of the U.S. movie market. You would have thought that they would have, played up the American angle a little bit more just to get some more ticket sales. But, they were mostly talking about inside British politics throughout the whole
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, I was surprised by just the omission of that. But maybe they didn't want to get into the whole business of trying to cast a Ronald Reagan and all that. Whenever you try to do that, you're going to have a bunch of people in the peanut gallery suddenly coming out and saying, "Oh, that doesn't sound like him, look like him,"
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah.
Um, I'm conflicted about the scene where she's leaving number 10 after her resignation.
Okay.
Conflicted because I think they blew it with the music. It was a very touching scene. It was it could have been as emotional as the real life scene of Nixon leaving the White House.
Yeah.
And instead they played this was some operatic kind
Oh,
of
yeah.
music while the staff were crying and all that. By the way, showing that she was not so imperious
Right.
to the people around her, etc. Anyway, I think they screwed up an opportunity to have that be a really impactful scene.
One thing the movie does get right is something we don't think about any longer, but the British society was constantly under threat of terrorism. There's something, this is something that was minimized in the US because the terrorists were Irish, and we love our Irish here. But from 1969 to 2001, the IRA killed more than 1,800 people, including leading politicians.
Yeah,
They almost killed Thatcher, as we saw here. And we think we have a divided country in the United States today, but it's nothing like Britain in the 1970s and 80s, where people were literally killing each other.
I know. It was like a slow motion 9/11
Right,
in terms of the scale.
right. And bigger if you think
Um,
about it in terms of percentage of the population.
right, and little kids, and it was awful. It was
Yeah,
awful. I did like the scene, the final scene when she dismissed Dennis for the last time,
yeah,
and he walked out the door. I just thought that was kind of touching,
yeah. I guess so.
schmaltzy but touching.
Yeah, even though I didn't like any really, the buying the milk scenes and the trying on the dress scenes, I did think that was, I agree that was touching. Okay, and we're ready to go to favorite lines.
Yeah,
All right, what do you got?
she says at one point, "I've always preferred the company of men."
Yeah,
And this was so damn true. And it was one of the secrets to her power and authority, her stage presence. She actually liked when she went to European meetings and she was in the midst of all these gray, balding, boring looking men,
yeah,
before, and, it's different now, but back then.
yeah.
And she actually played that to the hilt
Uh-huh.
in personal meetings with a flirtatious technique, in the way she dressed deliberately to stand out. So I like that line because it has a lot of truth to it.
So after the fictionalized meeting in which she berates her ministers, which didn't really happen, but I assume that stuff like that has happened. She says, one of the ministers says, she behaved appallingly. I wouldn't have spoken to my gamekeeper like that.
Yeah,
And this is something that no politician in America would ever dream of saying. I mean, how many of us have gamekeepers?
I know. It's just it actually turned a moment of unattractiveness in her to making another point about the snobbery and
Right.
of British society. That was funny. That was so funny. On a more serious note, I liked when she said, at one point she sort of complained It used to be about trying to do something.
Yeah.
Now it's about trying to be someone.
Yeah.
And I think that goes to your point about how she didn't sort of, as a woman, set about to populate the whole government with women.
Right.
She was interested in hard work and accomplishment rather than, what your identity is or your feelings even.
Yeah. I mean, one thing we have to take into account too is that the parliamentary system is a lot different from where it is in the United States. She can't decide on her own who's going to be in the cabinet. To get
Right.
to remain party leader and prime minister, she has to make compromises with all parts of her party. Otherwise, she won't get the votes. So
Right.
anyway, when she's campaigning in an ice cream factory and they ask her what she and her husband would like to sample, she gives her order and she says, it has to be something icy on a stick for Dennis.
She was good. I liked when Dennis said, one of their ruminations together. He said, and she was looking at videos or something of her past or her family. And he
Yeah.
said, you can rewind it, but
Yeah.
you can't change it,
Yeah.
which is good, worth remembering.
Yeah. Yeah.
Except when when I rewind things and wrote my autobiography, I did try to change something. Not change it, but polish it.
Yeah. When Dennis proposes marriage, she says, one's life must matter, Dennis. Beyond the cooking and the cleaning and the children, one's life must mean more than that. I cannot die washing up a teacup.
And
Of
what's the
course,
last scene in the movie? Yeah.
the last scene in the movie is her washing up a teacup.
A teacup. When they were, one of the times they were in bed, I think he was already dead, but there they were, both of them. And they were sort of sharing a back and forth on their resentments. And she says, people will hate you today, but thank you in later generations.
Yeah.
And then he quickly adds, or they'll forget you entirely and take you out with the rubbish, which is worth remembering. I was thinking about that when we talked about President Garfield.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if
forget you
anyone even
entirely.
remembers who President Garfield is, even though we did a whole podcast.
Right.
I'll just do one more. We could do this all day.
Yeah.
Because she is so quotable. The trade union, as she goes, the trade union movement was founded to protect workers. Now it persecutes them. It stops them from working. It is killing jobs and bringing this country to its knees. I say enough. It's time to get up. It's time to go back to work. It's time to put the great back into Great Britain. And
love it.
Yeah. So what she actually said, and it was related to the Falklands. She said, Great Britain is great again. When I heard this terminology, the first thing I thought of was a jab at Make America Great Again. But this movie came out well before Trump first thought of that, running for
right.
So,
Ronald Reagan's slogan was "Make America Great Again."
Right, so, right. So we shouldn't be banishing the word "great" because it just keeps coming back,
and it'll come back again. Maybe from the other party. You never know.
You have any more lines?
Well, at one point she summed up her approach, and she said, "Say the unsayable." And that was what she did to a great extent. She said the unsayable.
Yeah. All right. So how do you think this is relevant to politics and society today?
Oh, so many of the issues are maybe even more relevant than in the 80s. The validity of the whole European project versus nationalism of the individual EU countries. That's an important issue. The penchant of Western leaders to take refuge in their commander-in-chief powers. And you saw that with Thatcher and the Falklands, and you see that with our American presidents all the time. It must be so frustrating to deal with all these penny ante congressmen and senators or members of parliament that when you get to sort of move things around on the global chessboard and deal in statecraft and foreign affairs, no wonder why they all want to veer to that. Because they've got so much more power there. Even a British prime minister, than they do domestically. So I think that's a very relevant issue.
I would also say it's relevant to me because it's a good reminder that there are no permanent victories in history.
Yeah,
In 1999, 1991, when she left, Britain was once again punching above its weight, which I mentioned before. It was respected militarily, traditional values had been restored, the economy was on the dynamic, and morale was high. Now the country's a joke. Their economy is stagnant. They can't even rouse themselves to defend their own vital interests in the Middle East. And to the same extent, it's true in the United States. I mean, the victories we accomplished during the Reagan administration have now been undone, and the conservative movement, which seemed unstoppable, is now over. So there's no permanent victories in history. That's
right.
what I take away from this movie.
And the whole debate, in terms of the relevance of this, the whole debate over free markets versus socialism,
Yeah,
regulation versus
yeah,
deregulation, the class and economic divides, and are all more relevant today, if anything. And then the role of charismatic, iron-willed leaders.
yeah,
Is that who we're, is that who people in all kinds of systems are going to turn to? It seems that way. It
yeah.
seems that way.
Yeah, although in Thatcher's case, there's that old Japanese expression, I think, you stick your head out of over the fence, you'll get knocked off or something like that. I mean,
Yeah.
she managed to stick her head above for a long time, but eventually did get knocked off.
Which
Um,
leads me to one other sort of thought I had when thinking about today. I've actually flirted, especially when I read all about her and those biographies. I flirted with wondering about the viability of a parliamentary system here instead of what we've got.
yeah,
Um, because there wouldn't be as much gridlock, for one thing,
yeah,
because the majority would pick the head of state, the chief executive. And this film kind of undercuts my flirtation with wanting to adopt the British system because it's sort of bizarre, isn't it? How a handful of cabinet members and a handful of party leaders, and look at the state of our parties, who'd want to turn things over to either of them, can just decide that the country will have a new leader. And it might be months or even years before the public gets to vote on that leader. I mean, that's kind of a strange system to
yeah,
me.
yeah, yeah. It is. They've changed that around a little bit so that now the party leader is voted on by party members. So a little
Right.
bit like primaries, but it is a very weird system. I will also say that the other thing against the parliamentary system is, I don't know if you probably haven't even heard of this show, but there's a show called Borgen, which is about
Mm-mm.
a prime minister in Denmark, and they have a parliamentary system there, and they have like six or seven major parties, and
Yeah.
the prime, they spend a lot of time just trying to stitch together these coalitions, and it's very hard to get anything done because you need 40 members over here and 30 members over there and 60 over here to get a to get a majority, and holding them together is tough because at any moment anyone can just torpedo the coalition and then you have to start all over again.
Yeah. I mean, people who want transparency and sort of a populist approach to the will of the people. I mean, in these kinds of systems, there's so much backroom wheeling and dealing.
Yeah.
And except it's not smoke-filled room, it's cannabis-filled rooms now, probably. But I mean, anyway, my flirtation has kind of cooled
Yeah.
on it.
Okay. So if you were a high school teacher, would you assign this movie?
Well, there'd be nothing wrong with assigning it in terms of tastefulness. Um, but unless I was specifically teaching modern European history or the history of the United Kingdom, there's not enough content about America to make it valid.
Yeah, well, obviously you would only assign this in a world history class, even modern European history or something. I would do it if I was teaching that class, but you're right. I wouldn't teach it. I wouldn't assign it for a 11th grade history class about the United States.
Yeah.
Okay, let's grade the movie.
B plus.
I'm going to give it a B because of all the dementia scenes. If they chopped out those scenes and fleshed out her political career, I would have given it a B plus or even an A minus, depending on how they did it. So, yeah,
It would have won no Oscars, and the box would have
would
been
have won
five
no
instead of
Oscars.
5 million instead. No,
Might have been.
I get it. I get it
Yeah, yeah.
totally.
Okay. Any final thoughts? We're reached the end of our discussion here.
One more Margaret Thatcher quote.
Okay.
The individual is the sun, and the state is the moon that shines with borrowed light.
Here,
Isn't she
here.
great? Isn't
Here,
she great?
here. I wish I could. I really wish that could do a British accent because it would have been so much fun doing this in received upper British, upper received proper English or whatever it's called.
My name is Bond, James Bond.
Well, the Scottish one is easy to do.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So our podcast is available on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, and most podcast platforms. You can subscribe there. If you have comments, email me at garyholmes76@gmail. Our next movie is the Rob Reiner movie on Lyndon Johnson called LBJ. It's available now on Netflix, by the way. It's just popped up on my welcome screen, and I was surprised to see it there. And I completely forgotten that Rob Reiner did a movie on LBJ. So,
Well, I'm glad you and I are going to be able to have a chance to delve into our all-time favorite president.
geez, favorite
Just
to
a
hate.
joke, folks.
That's a
Just a
very,
joke.
very much a joke. All right. So we'll see you later, Jim. Bye bye.
Take care.